Hi, there's been a lot of talk lately about budget deficits and how much money Congress is spending and how it affects ordinary Americans and ordinary taxpayers. And so I wanted to do a little research and figure out, well, how does this affect me? Because I'm a taxpayer, I'm an American. Congress is saying, oh, you're going to have to pay this in the future, so I'd like to know kind of what that is. So I did a little bit of research. And I went online and I went to census.gov, which you can do. Census.gov tells us there's about 310 million Americans in the United States. That's a lot of people. Great. So when you hear something like, well, Obama's budget deficit was $1.42 trillion. Now another way of looking at that is, that's 1,420,000 millions. That's a lot of money. That got my attention. In fact, so Congress and President Obama said, we're going to spend a little over $3.5 trillion this year because, oh, we have all sorts of things we need to spend money on. Old cars that people are going to get rid of anyway and stuff like that, and more income transfer payments to people that perhaps aren't working. But the amount that they spent a little over $3.5 trillion, but actually only collected about 2.3 trillion. So the deficit is the amount that they spent that they didn't have. The taxpayers already paid all their taxes, but this is the amount over which taxpayers pay. So I asked the question, well, wait a minute. So there's 310 million Americans. Well, that actually, if you do the math, that only works out to about 4,500. Actually, it's 4,581 if you do the math of the share among all of the citizens. I said, wait a second. My kids don't pay taxes yet. They're kids. They don't have 2 nickels to rub together. Well, how many taxpayers are there? They're going to have to pay this. So I went to irs.gov. There turns out to be about 45 million taxpayers that have an adjusted gross income of $50,000 or higher. Now, curiously, this group of people making over $50,000, or couples, right, the adjusted gross income, pay 90% of all the income taxes collected in the United States every year. So I said to myself, well, wait a second, let's look at who's actually going to pay this. So if we take 90% of this figure, which works out to just under 1.3 trillion, $1.289 trillion is 90% of this, and then divide it by the 45 million, how much do the taxpayers owe? If you're in this category right here, here's the bad news. This year's budget deficit, this year alone, Congress and President Obama made you $28,649 deeper in debt. They just gave you a credit card bill for $28,649 this year alone. So, wow, well how bad has it been over the time that Congress has been laying other laws on and adding debt? So I did the same thing there. So the government debt right now stands at about $13.43 trillion. And again, that's roughly 13,430,000 millions is what that number really represents. And so if we take that by 310 million Americans, that's not so bad. That works out to about $43,000 that each American owes on the government debt. But if you're one of those unfortunate ones that actually drives the train in this economy and you actually make over $50,000, guess what? Your number is $270,000 that Congress has said, you can pay that because you're an American taxpayer. Now, one took this one last step. The thing is, I don't expect ever to collect from Social Security and Medicare because, something, I've been contributing so long, and unfortunately, I'm in this category too, so I know they're coming after me. Bruce Bartlett, former Treasury official, wrote an article in Forbes that estimated, well, how much do we owe in the future for Social Security and Medicare that we haven't actually counted on to pay for? So the same deficit, that is the unfunded liability for Medicare and Social Security, is $105 trillion, according to Bruce Bartlett, the former Treasury official. And so you look at that number and say, well, per American, that's still pretty scary. That works out per American to about $340,000. But guess what? If you're a real taxpayer, if you're in this 90% gang, the amount that you owe is just over $2 million. It's $2.136 million. So when you add these up, you get into the neighborhood of about $2.4 million that Congress has said you owe it because you work hard and you're in the 90% gang. So there you go. Does that change how you think about Congress? It does for me.